Alright guys, we're going to be talking about resources from the ocean and ocean pollution today. So we're going to first start talking about living resources, and some of the living resources out there is fish. About 75 million tons are harvested each year, and keep in mind 1 ton is 2,000 pounds, so that is a lot of fish. And because of that, overfishing has become a problem. Anytime you got money involved, profit, you're going to have issues with people doing the wrong thing. So we're having a lot of fish taken out, like orange roughy, rockfish, swordfish, bluefin tuna, and we're taking out the adults, the ones that are able to breed. And we're taking too many of the breeders out, so you're not getting enough fish being left to basically repopulate the area. And one of the issues with fishing from the ocean is something called drift nets, because it makes it very easy to overfish. And these are basically really long nets that look like fences in the ocean. And they kind of drift out there, and any fish that basically swims into them gets stuck. The problem is, it's not always necessarily the fish you're looking for. So back in the day, when I was a kid, one of the issues out there was dolphin and tuna. So if you look at your cans of tuna in the house, you'll find a little label that says dolphin safe, dolphin free. And you're like, why on earth would they ever have that? And that was because of drift nets. And I believe this was back in the 70s. And fishermen were basically, putting out these nets, trying to catch the tuna. And anything that swam into those nets, including dolphin, were pulled up. And they weren't really paying attention whether it's dolphin or tuna. They ended up in the processing plant. So there was tuna out there that had dolphin meat in it, and that, of course, eventually made the press. The press put it out there, and it was a huge issue. So they had to find ways to basically allow the dolphins to get out of there and keep the tuna in. This extra stuff that gets trapped, that's called bycatch. So in order to deal with some of this, there are actually farmers out there whose whole job is farming the ocean. They create these big ponds and they breed fish, like shrimp, oysters, crabs, mussels, catfish. A lot of this is done this way. Tilapia. A lot of these types of fish are actually grown in these big ponds. They're fed cornmeal, whatever else there is, and then when they hit a certain weight, they are harvested. In fact, one of my professors back in the 80s, his whole job, his research was actually with catfish. And apparently, I don't remember if it's the male or the female, but one of them is actually, in general, larger than the other. So his whole research was trying to find a way to flip the sex of the catfish so that you would get more of the sex that is heavier in weight, which is better for the farmer because he has more to sell. The slide up here you see here is all about sea kelp or seaweed. And you got a picture of it down on the right hand side, and you can see some of the things that it's actually used in. But there's some things that you probably don't realize that the stuff is actually used in, such as ice cream and a lot of jellies. It's used as a thickener in these things. So it's an extract from kelp. Of course, sushi has it in there. It's actually really good for you. It's high in protein. There's tons of it out there. It grows exceedingly fast, 33 centimeters a day. And it's a species of algae. There are plenty of non-living resources out there. I'm not going to go over oil and natural gas because that is one in which we've already talked about in class. But one of them that we haven't talked about is the ocean water itself, taking the salt out of it and using it as fresh water, and that's desalinization. And you're wondering, we talked about in our freshwater unit, how come we have such problems with having enough fresh water around the world? How come, people aren't using this desalinization process a lot more? Because there's tons of ocean water. Why not make fresh water? Well, it's expensive. It sounds really good, but it's not cheap. So when you actually do this, you're going to have to pass the cost along to the consumer. And a lot of these areas that need this are very poor, so they can't really afford to buy this water, and the countries can't afford to make it because they don't have the money. Saudi Arabia does use it, and has one of the largest desalination plants in the world. We actually use it. Florida, California, Texas, they all have desalination plants. Another one is seafloor minerals. They are basically these kind of looks like a, I'm not sure what it would look like. It looks like a big lumpy rock, and these big lumpy rocks are called nodules. And they're made up mainly of manganese, which is used to make steel. They also some contain iron, phosphates, nickel, copper, cobalt, a lot of important minerals that we use in our technology. And we think that about 15% of the ocean floor is covered in these little chunks of minerals, which is great. Think how much of the ocean covers our world. But it's really deep, not easy to get to, not cheap to get to. So part of the problem with this is that you got to look at a cost-benefit analysis. Is it worth the possible human life issue of getting down there and doing it? Is it worth the technology issue? If we're going to use something that doesn't have man in it to remove these nodules, that's not going to be cheap. It's going to be quite costly. So you've got to look at, okay, we get these nodules up. We have to use the technology to do it, possibly humans. Can we actually sell these minerals at a price that is going to make it worth us doing it? And at this point, it's just not quite there. Energy is another non-living resource. We talked about oil and gas, but we also have tidal energy, which is used as the tides. Cook Inlet, Alaska uses it. This is wave energy, using waves to create energy. Scotland and England uses this. Now, here's some of the problems with what's going on with the ocean. Trash dumping is one of them. We've talked about trash dumping already. But if you look in the picture on the left-hand side there, that is from the Great Garbage Patch in the Pacific. And there are these currents that actually drag all this trash to this one area. And it almost looks like these guys are in a big dump, like a city dump. But you can see by a boat, they're not. And it's crazy how much there is. A lot of problems with trash. Obviously, animals a lot of times think it is food and they get tangled up in it. They choke in it. We've talked about sludge dumping already. There's a lot of issues with it. And when it becomes like raw sewage, it becomes a huge issue when you look at E. coli. Oil spills. You guys probably remember the Deepwater Horizon oil spill. It's a little bit different. It wasn't a tanker that ran aground, but it was at a drilling rig that exploded in the Gulf of Mexico. The one I remember is the Exxon Valdez. It literally happened the year I graduated from college, and it was just a nightmare to see. There was enough oil spilled there to fill 125 Olympic-sized swimming pools. Now, think about that. That is a massive amount of oil that was spilled. And back in the 80s, it cost $2.1 billion to clean up, and they're still having problems. Keep that in mind. So, $2.1 billion. Now, think about how much that would be nowadays with inflation. And $2.1 billion is nothing to sneeze at even now. There are a lot of effects with oil spills. I mean, obviously there are going to be environmental effects with life in the ocean, but there are also economic effects. So if you think about with the Deepwater Horizon, there were tourism issues. So you had hotels, motels, restaurants, t-shirt shops, all those little commercial things that go on around the Gulf of Mexico. They weren't having it anymore. No one goes down to the ocean to hang out at a beach if it's not safe. It's oil covering it. It's just not happening. So a lot of these people lost tons of money. And for them, they make up a good chunk of their business during the, starting like Easter all the way to like through September. This is their season. They make up most of the money for the year during that time period where people come down during their vacations. So a lot of people lost their businesses. It was horrible. And you have your commercial fishermen who are bringing in the shrimp, who are bringing in the crabs, the lobster, all those fun things there. They lost money because you can't go out and bring this stuff in when it's covered in oil. And even worse, a lot of the breeding grounds are going to be screwed. So the amount of fish that you're going to get as things are cleaned up are going to be less. In the meantime, you got to pay for your boat. Your crew is not getting paid. And those folks who aren't getting paid, kind of like what's happening right now with the COVID, the coronavirus. If you don't have any money, you can't spend money. And if you can't spend money, the economy further tanks. So people's jobs, their livelihood, they were losing homes, losing their boats, a huge amount of issues with that. And then, of course, you do have your environmental effects. And here's some pictures from above, the way you can see what it looks like. And here's some areas where we had some major ones across the world. And we talked about too, they happen in the United States, but they do happen all across the world. Some of the nasty ones throughout the years here. You can hear Deepwater Horizon, one of the largest ones out there. It definitely hurts living things here. Obviously, oil is poisonous. It causes skin irritation, eye irritation. It will smother some small species of fish. It will coat feathers and fur. And a lot of these guys with the feathers and fur, this is how they maintain their body temperatures. And when you coat it with oil, they can't do that anymore. So they freeze. They get, it's just impossible for them. Seabirds have this problem, obviously. Otters have a major issue with this problem. And when they ingest food that has this oil in it, they get ulcers, they get internal bleeding, and this stuff bleeds off further. You end up, they found some dead and dying sea turtles 7 miles from the Deepwater Horizon. And you got there some birds covered or turtle covered, and of course my favorite, otters covered. Cleaning up is not easy, even with all the tech we have today. It's actually pretty simplistic. We use booms, which are barriers that can kind of keep the oil from moving further out, because oil is going to be at the beginning on the surface. We have skimmers that kind of like if you have oil when you're cooking and it's rising to the surface of whatever you're cooking, you skim it off the top of it. We have materials that you can put into the water that will absorb it. That's also not too environmental. We have dispersants you can put into the ocean, which actually makes the oil break up into smaller little bitty pieces. And the idea of these little bitty pieces are going to be spread out further through currents. And because they're smaller and they're being spread out over a larger area, they think they'll have less problems with it. But we found that environmentally these dispersant agents aren't that great. And we got some skimmers here, some booms for you. One of the things that we're using now, we're differing how our tankers are built. So instead of having a single hull, the hull is the outside of the boat, outside the tanker, we have a double hull. So if it runs aground, hopefully only the first layer gets broken. And so yes, you have water coming in and you're going to have problems with the whole tanker sinking, but it can stay afloat a bit longer. Hopefully the oil isn't leaking out. Hopefully you can get another ship in there to pull the oil out, or maybe the tanker can limp on in and get fixed.